Hey guys, this is Chris Dixon, Senior Editor with Power and Motor Yacht Magazine, and I'm bringing you today's Power and Motor Yacht podcast. For today's podcast, I traveled down to the Gulf Coast of Florida to interview a fascinating lady named Kathy Robbins. Now, back in 1968, Kathy traveled with her husband on a small Glasstron boat clear from Juneau, Alaska, across the United States to New York and ultimately Key West. Their mission, as you can imagine, set a record, and her story is fascinating. First, we'll have a word from our sponsor. Sleipner's revolutionary vector fin stabilizers are a true game changer for motor yachts over 45 feet. The unique patented curve of the fins makes them up to 110% more efficient than straight fins, providing stabilization both at anchor and underway. The curved design of the fin, combined with its lightweight construction, also creates lift when underway, improving the ride while also saving fuel. Learn more by contacting the experts at Emtra or visit their website at emtra.com. Hey guys, this is Chris Dixon, Senior Editor with Power and Motor Yacht Magazine. I'm really excited today to be down in beautiful Naples, Florida on what is a remarkably chilly morning for Naples. I'm here with Kathy Robbins, formerly Kathy Diamond. Formerly before that, Kathy, what was your last name?
Rowan, R-O-H-A-N.
R-O-H-A-N. And I became aware of Kathy, whose late husband authored this book. It's called Across the U.S.A. by Boat. Now, Kathy came to my attention because of a post on the Antique Outboard Motor Club Facebook page. And her nephew, Chuck, had just put up a picture of the book, if I'm not mistaken, or a photo from your journey. And I became aware of a story that I think it actually captured a lot of media attention back in 1968 when you guys made the trip, right? But it may not be something that those of us of a slightly newer vintage might recognize or have heard about. And I'd never heard about it. Dan Harding had never heard about it. And essentially what Bill and Kathy did is, well, you can describe the boat to, describe the boat to our listeners.
It was a 20-foot Glasstron.
20 foot.
Deep V.
Okay.
Hull. And we had two 55s on it.
Okay.
That were
two Evinrude 55s.
Two Evinrude 55s. And they had been newly introduced the prior year by the factory. And they were trying to promote the 55, which was a three-cylinder boat, a three-cylinder engine.
Right.
And they were trying to promote that as a way that a normal boating couple could do an adventure without mega yachts, okay?
Right.
And so that's what we did.
And so what they did is they went on this 20-foot Glasstron, not from, say, New York to, I don't know, Key West. No, they went from Juneau through the middle of the country, down the Missouri, up the Mississippi. Would that have been it?
No, actually, we went up the Mississippi only 20 miles.
20 miles.
The Missouri River comes in just north of St. Louis.
Okay.
We went down to St. Louis because we lived there and we had a lot of press there. And then we went up another 20 miles and caught the Illinois River, which heads off towards Chicago, north of where the Missouri comes in.
Right. Okay, gotcha. And then they went, so then there were Great Lakes journeys, eventually New York. The journey was going so well that, if I'm not mistaken, the Evinrude brass said, well, did you guys propose to go all the way down to Key West then?
I think Bill did, and this was in Milwaukee.
Okay.
We proposed because there were some fellow boaters who were saying, well, this isn't the longest journey. We've made a longer journey. And so Bill suggested it to Ralph Evinrude.
Okay. To Ralph Evinrude himself.
Ralph Evinrude,
wow.
yes. He was still quite active in the firm. And they did extend it then to Key West.
Man, that's just amazing. So let's think about this for a second. We're talking about a journey from Juneau to Key West on a boat that, while well outfitted for 1968, did not have GPS, didn't have any kind of radar. It did have a depth finder, if I'm not mistaken, right? Or a depth sounder of sorts?
No. We had a radio rangefinder.
Okay.
Okay. That was about only navigation, other than charts and some training.
Oh yeah,
we
for
knew
sure.
rivers. Okay, so that was in our favor.
Well, let's back up. Now that folks know about this amazing journey that you guys took, tell me a little bit about your, this book, which is amazing, by the way. If you can find it on eBay or elsewhere, and I'm hoping one of these days Power Motoryacht can republish it. It's really something. It's called Across the U.S.A. by Boat by Bill and Kathy Diamond. You guys obviously let me back up. Tell me about your upbringing, because you had boating experience before. Bill had boating experience. Talk to us a little bit about that and kind of how you ended up as a computer programmer of all things in 1968.
Well, there's a connection, can't you see? No. No, when I was growing up, we would vacation in Minnesota.
Okay.
And my dad he had an outboard motor, and the resort would have John boats. So we went.
And what did your dad do for a living, by the way?
He worked for the phone company.
Okay.
He ended up being general maintenance supervisor for Southwestern Bell.
Okay.
But he loved fishing. So we would go out fishing in one of the John boats with his engine. And and I learned how to water ski, and I learned how to operate the engine there. So I had that boating experience. And then when I met Bill, we recommissioned a boat that had been decommissioned after World War II, a 34-foot Defoe. And so he and a buddy and me, we recommissioned it,
wow.
got it ready for the water, launched it, and had a really nice summer on this boat.
And where was it? Which waterway did you operate?
The Mississippi River.
On the Mississippi,
north
okay.
of St. Louis.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that's what we did. And then finally that boat lost the housing for its gear case out in the middle of the river. So we were, biting our nails,
I don't doubt
hoping
it.
that no tow ran into us. Anyway, we did get it home, and we decided not to fix it, and the owner wasn't interested in putting any money into it either. So then Bill and I married, and having married, he bought a boat that was a 26-foot little tiny cabin cruiser.
Okay.
It had a cabin, and I think it had a head, if I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And we had that for a couple, 3 years.
What year did you guys get married? Do you remember?
64.
64, okay,
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
And so we did that for, like I said, a couple, 3 years. And then Bill decided that we should sell the boat. I think he had in mind to get another boat. But anyway, so we were boatless when this trip opportunity came for Evinrude.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a newscaster in St. Louis, Sterling Harkins, who was promoting it, a boating couple with solid experience to take a trip from Juneau, Alaska to New York City.
Wow.
And so I called immediately the factory. And of course, Saturday afternoon.
You called the Evinrude factory?
Evinrude factory.
Okay.
They were closed. So the guard said, "Lady, you got to call back on Monday." So I did call back on Monday, and we got information about the trip. They brought us to Milwaukee. We interviewed with the brass there. They interviewed 4 couples in all.
Now, I imagine, and if I recall correctly from the book, I mean, there were a lot of couples that wanted to do this, or a lot of couples that claimed they had the experience that they
Yes.
maybe didn't have. So Evinrude really had to do some screening.
Yes, they did. The number 1,800 comes to mind.
Oh, my
However,
Lord.
there were one of the finalists, 4 couples, admitted when they got to Milwaukee they weren't even married. And of course, back then that was a non-starter.
Right,
okay?
right.
Another couple said that they could do it, but they would need 2 months off in the middle to attend to business. I
Okay.
don't know whether he was an attorney or an accountant or something. And that was a non-starter. And then the third couple, according to what I hear, the gal got off the airplane when they went to meet them, and she had one of those updos,
Yeah,
hairdo
big
that was,
bouffant.
and they looked at her and said, "Oh, I don't think so." And my hair was pretty much like it is now, set it and forget it. So.
Gotcha.
Anyway, so we kind of got it almost by default, but we had solid experience.
Now, Bill was working as a sliding door salesman,
Yes.
right? And
Modern fold doors.
Modern Fold Doors, based out of St. Louis.
I don't know where they're based.
Okay, gotcha.
I think Indiana, something like that, but I don't know.
Now,
Can't remember.
And you were a computer programmer for IBM. You have a
Actually, I
background
wasn't
in,
a programmer, but I was a computer consultant
Okay.
with IBM. They
So-
call them systems engineers.
systems engineer. So how did that even happen for you? Like, that's an interesting, like you were on the ground floor then with IBM when they were really getting into mainframes and that sort of
They
thing.
had been around for maybe 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah, well, they weren't brand new.
Right.
But I was working 16 hours a day, and Bill wasn't happy about that. So I had resigned from IBM.
Oh, no kidding.
And went to work for a couple of their clients, helping the clients install new equipment. And so I was between contracts when this opportunity came up.
Oh, wow.
I was about to sign one, and I didn't because this opportunity came up.
Tell me about, I know you guys had, both of you guys had obviously pretty considerable boating experience, including boating experience on moving water. But I'm also interested to know aspects of each of your personalities that maybe, I don't know, made the Evinrude people choose you, but not just that, but aspects of your personalities that made you want to do this. You know what I mean?
Who would not like an all-expense-paid trip from Juneau, Alaska to New York City
on
your own boat? I mean, that's really an adventure. And I think we were both that adventuresome that we would do that.
How old were you at that time, if you don't mind me asking?
25, Bill was 29.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that's definitely the adventurous age, and you didn't have kids.
No kids,
so, Right. Do you remember, was it just both of you were just like, when you found out about this, obviously you called him right away. Did Bill have any hesitation either?
No, he didn't.
Wow.
Our parents were not quite so. They said, what are you doing,
Right.
But
they, obviously, you were able to say.
We were what they call emancipated children, so they had no control over it anyway.
Gotcha. Well, so this boat, this was a Glasstron 20-footer. It had a little forward cuddy area, but it didn't have sleeping. Let's talk about the boat itself and how you guys came into it.
It was a deep V hull,
okay.
So it was fairly stable. And the little cuddy that you mentioned just was for the anchor and some lines and stuff like that. Nothing, no accommodations up there. We had back-to-back seats that laid down to be bunks.
Okay.
And then the outfitters built custom boxes that were after the aft seat, so that when you laid the seats down, you had a slight incline.
Okay.
So we were a little bit elevated.
So you would sleep head towards the bow?
Head towards the stern.
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
Head towards the stern.
Gotcha.
And that was it for facilities. We had a little butane stove, camping stove. And for a head, we used a Rubbermaid bucket.
Catch and release.
Yes, right. Right.
So, and the boat had, if I recall from reading the book, it had 3 gas tanks. It had a pair of, now, this was an interesting story about the engines. Tell us about how the engines that ended up on the boat. These were twin 55 Evinrudes.
Yeah, twin 55s. It was new the previous year.
Okay.
And they were promoting the engine, obviously. And so we had twins of that. And they were, back in Milwaukee, they were hand torquing 2 engines for us to use. But unfortunately, they were late. And so what we did when they outfitted the boat and got it all balanced and everything, they used 2 stock engines. So we left
2 showroom engines, just
right out
anybody
of,
could have walked
right
in and
out
bought.
of dealer inventory.
Gotcha.
Right.
Wow.
So we used those, and then along the way, still in the Alaska Inside Passage, we lost the lower unit on one of them.
Oh man.
Now they had wanted us to take a spare lower unit, but we didn't, because where do you put a lower unit in a 20-foot boat?
Yeah, right.
So we didn't take it with us, but there was one on hand, so they flew one up to us.
On a seaplane.
On a seaplane. They were, now
Wow.
we were accompanied by not just people we had met in Juneau or Ketchikan, something like that, that had a large cabin cruiser. And we were headed south through the Inside Passage, sort of together. And they said, oh, well, good luck with that, getting a lower unit replaced. And the next morning, there was the seaplane.
That's amazing.
They said, I'll be darned.
It's really interesting, too, to think about as well, because, this was a risk for, not that you guys didn't know what you were doing, but this was a risk for Evinrude. It's obviously big PR bonanza if the boat makes it, but gosh, you guys were heading across, what is it called? The Dixon Pass?
Dixon entrance.
Dixon entrance. And
yeah, Port Charlotte.
And I mean, the inside passage it's inside, but it's not entirely
it
inside.
has two open two open water.
Big
things.
ones.
Yeah.
Right. Well, when you guys first set off, like, was there a lot of fanfare in Juneau? Was there? I mean, the press was there. Were there marching bands or that sort of thing? Did you just guys slip out?
Well, no, we spent like 2 or 3 days in Juneau with press.
Okay.
Okay, and I think I was wearing white slacks and a red shirt, and then they told me at the end of day 1 that we had to wear the same clothes all 3 days. Those white slacks were toast when I finished. I mean,
Doubt it.
I wish they'd known differently. Anyway, so.
Had you been to Alaska before, either of you?
No.
What were your impressions of? I've been to Juneau, and it's that whole area, the inside passage.
Well, we flew in from Seattle to Juneau, and we get off the airplane, and if you've been to the airport in Juneau, it is, of course, sea level.
Yeah, right there.
So Bill says, "What elevation are we?" And I'm saying, well, we're pretty much sea level.
Yeah,
and he
right.
was fooled. You look around, and it's like you are in an alpine environment, because the water, the cliffs, the water, they go right down into the water. And so you go up to a cliff, and your depth sounder is reading like 50 feet. You say, you can't even anchor. You have to tie to shore.
Wow, literally tight, because it drops off that fast.
Yes, it does.
Wow, that's amazing.
So,
and it's just so it must have been just such a I mean, gratifying, but also just mind-blowing experience as Midwesterners to see that landscape and know that you're going to be going hundreds of miles down this waterway.
So our first night out, we spent in somewhere close to Juneau. We weren't underway for very long. And then I woke up the next morning. I thought, we wanted to get an early start, because that was going to be a long journey.
Sure.
So I shot up out of my bunk, and I said, Bill, we got to get up. The sun is up. We were in the land of the midnight sun.
Yes, you were at that time of year.
2 in the morning. And we thought, well, heck, we're up already. We might as well get going, because you had enough light.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we did that. That was the last time we made that mistake, though.
Wow. How sort of pre-planned and route planned was the trip? I mean, you guys were using charts. I remember it saying in the book that you had something along the lines of 1,000 feet of linear feet of charts for this trip. Like, how sort of pre-planned was the run down the inside passage, and maybe just some recollections of the people you met and the weather you encountered.
The weather was pretty good, and I think they timed it that June is a nice time to go.
Right.
We met fishermen, local fishermen. We met fellow boaters. As I mentioned, typically larger boats than we were.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So
were some people just shaking their heads like, "Are you kidding me?"
No, actually not, because there's a lot of boating that goes on up there. The water is not suitable for swimming, so you get a lot of people who are into boating, but they don't swim. So drowning is a big issue in Alaska, just because the kids aren't trained to swim, unless they go to a pool.
Right.
So, but anyway, we did meet a lot of people and saw a lot of sights, basically. The icebergs,
Was that ever an issue? Like, did you really have to watch out approaching glaciers? Like, what was the one, Mendenhall?
Mendenhall Glacier was that we did not go into that bay.
Okay.
That's kind of a different bay. But the ice field I think is there a picture in the book on the ice field. Yeah, that there were some very big icebergs, and there was one grounded. And you stay away from them.
Yeah, I saw a picture of that. You can see it's water line half out of the water with the tide.
And if they get high enough, they'll flip, and you don't want to be there when they flip.
Yeah.
So.
Did you ever feel like this was, especially, I'm just wondering in Alaska, especially because it's just such a vast, it's such a vast place.
Well, you had asked before if the route was planned out.
Right.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yes, it was, because they had to have Evinrude distributors and dealers along the way to welcome us and to provide stuff we needed.
Yeah, sure.
You know,
Fuel and supplies, etc.
Oil change on the engines and stuff like that. So they had planned that out. Also, the Coast Guard was aware of it. And believe it or not, we did see a few cruise ships in the Inside Passage. Okay, that was comforting because it is a fallback position. If you run into trouble, you are going to get some people going by.
And you guys had, I would imagine, a pretty powerful VHF on that boat.
We did.
Yeah.
We did.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And didn't the Coast Guard say something like that was one of the best equipped small boats they'd ever seen?
Well, it was, let's face it.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. So when you guys got you told me about following that larger boat, the couple that had the cruiser. At one point, the waves, I guess, were even in your favor, even though they were in a much bigger boat, right?
Oh, right. They were. That was crossing the Dixon entrance, and they got separated from us. They were a little faster than we were. So, but we were just going along. We didn't realize, though, that the period of the waves was maybe 25 or 30 feet. Our boat was 20 feet. So we were riding up and down and up and down. We were just happy as clams. They were not. They lost every piece of equipment that wasn't nailed down.
Wow.
I mean, on the floor of the cabin, TV broke. You know, they were worried about us. So when we finally showed up, they said, "Oh my God, thank goodness you're here." And
you were fine.
Yeah. What was the wrong?
What about when you? That's an interesting, point to me because I've, boated in a lot of short period chop and I mean I know you have too. How did that boat? Were there ever any points when you were like, boy, this is a little boat in a big sea, or did you pretty much feel safe most of the time? You know what I mean?
We pretty much felt safe the whole time.
Wow, that's great. That's great.
Sometime on the Missouri, where it gets so shallow, like Mark Twain says, you don't know whether to plow it or drink it. There, you wonder. One time it's hard to follow a channel like that on the Upper Missouri, and we were ending up in the middle of a field surrounded by a fence, like a farm fence. You said, "Oh, geez." So then you wonder, why are you there?
Okay? Right.
But I mean, it's not a matter of safety. We never felt at risk.
That's great.
Safety-wise.
Gosh, because it's it is now. I mean, I think much more people boat the Inside Passage. At that point, I'm trying to remember too. There's a very treacherous kind of narrow channel in the Inside Passage, and I should have researched this ahead of time, but they dynamited part of the rock to make it more passable. Like the current flows were so bad that there
was an area where there was a terrible eddy that happened, and either the ebb or the flow. If you caught it, what you should do is go through it at still tide. Between the two. But with our engines, we weren't. It was more it had a more dastardly effect on
bigger
a
boats.
A smaller boat or a sailboat that didn't have power. We just powered right through.
You just skipped right across
it. You could tell the stern was slipping and sliding. You could tell that you were in the eddy. And we tried to time it, but I don't think we exact hit slack tide.
And those tides are huge there. I mean,
they are.
Were there ever any points when the tides in particular, or the fog, or the where you were really like disappearing into waves, where the boat did feel small, or did it feel like this was the boat for the job?
It was the boat for the job. Yeah.
That's cool.
On the Missouri, we thought this boat's too big.
Yeah.
Because it really was. I mean, you do better with a John boat.
So when you guys did you go up the Columbia River?
We went up the Columbia.
Okay.
We had intended to go up the Snake. But when we got to the Dalles, which is an area just below, it's a narrow part of the Columbia.
What do you call it?
The Dalles, D-A-L-L-E-S.
Okay.
Dalles. It was very windy, and we got word that the Snake River was closed to navigation. So that means, why should we go any further? We were beating ourselves silly on those waves. We had wind against the waves on that section of the Columbia.
Uh-huh.
So we hauled out there and then proceeded to go across the Continental Divide at that point.
And that's a point that we had talked about. Like people say, well, didn't you have a reporter say, well, why didn't you take the boat the whole entire way? Because at some point the water, there's you've got the Continental Divide. That's where the rivers actually start, right?
Right.
So you
There
can't.
is that.
Yeah. you have to haul out at some point in time. Emtra is a 100% employee-owned company committed to bringing best-in-class products, expert product knowledge, and unparalleled support to the entire marine industry throughout North America since 1952. How did you make these longer stretches? Like, how did you guys provision with food and gasoline? At one point, you were in Montana 3 days without seeing other people.
Mm-hmm.
How did you guys provision the boat? And did you ever run out of gas?
Well, yes, but that was on the St. Lawrence.
Oh,
so,
okay.
The one photo that we saw, I don't know if it's in the book or not, Corps of Engineers brought us some gasoline at one point. We were in touch with the Coast Guard and in touch with the Corps of Engineers. Basically, the whole trip that we were on the rivers.
Okay, gotcha.
So,
Via VHF in most cases, then that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they also knew the route, and I think maybe Evinrude had made some arrangements too. So.
Did the boat you were talking about on the Missouri? How often would you guys? You had a depth sounder on it. Is that right? Or
I don't know. I know we had. I don't remember a depth sounder.
Okay.
No, I remember
But
a
you were
radio
saying,
direction finder. That
Okay.
was somebody loaned us.
But you said like you would see something and it would indicate that you were 50 feet in 50 feet of water, and then it would.
Well, we knew that just
okay.
by
By the
somebody
charts.
had a depth finder.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Because maybe we asked, why can't we anchor? And they said, well, here's why
okay.
you can't anchor.
Makes good
There's
sense.
nothing to anchor on.
did going up to Columbia, like I'm imagining, one, I know that can be really treacherous with regards to wind and stuff, but there's also like logs and I mean you're going up a pretty active river.
We didn't run into any debris, natural or otherwise.
That's great. Jeez.
And we also picked up the Columbia at the bottom of Puget Sound.
Okay.
So we didn't go over the Columbia Bar.
Okay.
Which is can be very treacherous.
Yeah, very treacherous.
Yeah.
So you didn't have to go out
Right.
offshore
Right.
and pick that up.
Beautiful country. I've since been back there, but no, we didn't do that.
What and we were out. You were showing me some photos of some of the geology, particularly like in Montana. I'm wondering, just what were your impressions of passing through this landscape?
Well, basically, I
Western
grew
landscape.
up in a river bottom. Okay, so we have what we call the Palisades along the upper Mississippi, starting at Alton, and that's beautiful. But this was like nonstop Palisades. It was the river cut through all these rocks, and you could see at one point, we have a picture that shows a coal seam in the rock. Okay, so it's definitely sedimentary. There was one picture where it's an upturned strata.
Yeah, that was
totally
amazing.
upturned.
You showed that. It was like a spine of
And then
rock.
one rock face, which probably was lava based. I didn't get close enough, and I really wasn't into it as much then. But now thinking back and looking at the picture, it probably was lava based.
So when you guys got to, how did the trip change? Because you're going excuse me, upstream until you get to to your 400-mile portage, and then you're going downstream. How did the boating change going upriver versus downriver in the western?
Well, much
States.
less water.
Less water.
Much less water.
Huh.
Yes.
Was that because of drought, or is that's
No,
just the way it was?
because of the upper Missouri is not very much water.
Yeah.
We put in at Fort Benton, which is just below Great Falls,
Okay.
and another reporter said, "Sorry, reporters, why did you put in below Great Falls?" And I said, "Well, I didn't really want to go over the Great Falls." We
Right.
decided to avoid that.
Yes, that would make
Yeah.
very good sense for
Yeah,
sure.
right.
For sure.
But there wasn't very much water. Truly, was it Mark Twain said, "You don't know whether to plow it or drink it." You know.
What was the longest hang up that that you remember? Like, did you guys ever get to a point where you hung it up and you're like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have to call somebody to pull us off?
No, we never had to. Well, we did have to get out and push.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And typically, Bill would get out and push, and I would be in the boat, under control until he was able to get back in. So.
Wow. Yeah, that's something. And then in terms of, so you went down. What are your recollections of the passage? And were people surprised to see you out there? I mean, I know that maybe people were more aware in the Inside Passage just of boats like yours in general, but were people surprised to see you
on the
Missouri?
On the northern part of the Missouri River, there are 6 reservoirs. There's 6 dams. We hauled around each of the dams. 6 reservoirs, which are pretty good for boating, but when they get up, when they get down towards the dam, you've got lots of water. But up in the upper reaches, just after the upstream dam, there's hardly any water at all. So that was where we were running out of water quite regularly.
Gotcha. Yeah. And then you also, when you had to haul out, some of the trailers were a little sketchy.
Some of them were Mongo trailers, with steel cables to haul you out. But one was like for a John boat, and it had polyethylene line, which is, stretches and snaps.
Yep. So
that was a nail biter, but it worked out all right. So.
And then you went St. Louis, and then you guys headed north towards Chicago on the Illinois River. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. Any particular recollections about that Mark Twainy passage as well? Like, because you were going upriver at that point.
Not really. The Illinois is totally a different river than we were familiar with the Mississippi, of course, and the Missouri is totally a different river. Just the banks are much lower and more benign, I'll call them.
On the Illinois.
On the Illinois, yeah.
Gotcha.
And then, of course, you get up towards Chicago, and you are into the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal, which I guess now has an electric dam on it. I don't know if you heard about that. Different subject.
Yeah.
Okay. And then into Chicago, and I guess we stopped along the way, but at Peoria, too, is a pretty big town to stop at.
I remember one of the things that Bill was talking about, which was interesting to me, is in some of the places, maybe along the Trent waterway as well, the level of pollution that you saw, because this was
Sanitary and Ship Canal.
Okay,
yeah.
Sanitary was exactly what it wasn't, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's fairly descriptive.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So it's interesting, because at that point in time, and it was interesting to read his perspective, because you think back on, okay, at that point in time, we take a lot of these things for granted now, but at that point in time, cars didn't have catalytic converters, all the motors were 2-stroke. We didn't have, if we did have the Clean Water Act at that point, it was very new. I think the Clean Water Act came after that, so it was, there was. His description, I remember, of the litter and pollution in that canal was just like really something.
Ship Canal.
Yeah. But and then Lake Erie was notoriously polluted. Did you guys go across Lake Erie?
We bypassed Lake Erie.
Okay.
What we did was on Lake Huron, there's a bay to the east, Georgian Bay, and there's a canal that goes from Georgian Bay to Lake Ontario. Okay, and that is called the Trent Severn Canal.
Right.
And we hooked up there.
I heard that's quite a wonder of engineering.
It is beautiful, and it's not polluted at all. It connects, I don't know how many, like 50 different lakes.
Wow.
I could have the number of lakes is a lot of different individual lakes connected by either natural streams or man-made canals, including one hydraulic lift, which is interesting. There's 2 bathtubs, and they're each operated by pistons. And so you drive into the lower pool bathtub.
Right.
They close the gate behind you. They pump a little more water into the upper pool.
Okay.
Which makes that one heavier than the lower one, and it lifts up your whole boat.
Oh,
and
my
there's
gosh.
no water exchange in there. So, if you've ever gone through locking, the water inside of lock can be very turbulent. Nothing like that in this one hydraulic lift lock.
Were you guys aware of the this canal and lock system before? Like, had you seen anything like that before?
But we learned that they had scheduled us through there, and I was glad they did because it was a very good experience.
That's awesome. Wow, that's so cool.
I would recommend to anybody who has a little boat. I think the limit back then was 35 feet in length, but it's worth the trip. It really is.
I know a lot of loopers and small boats. Yeah, that's kind of a bucket list type journey. You guys also went to Mackinac Island. I think Bill had a funny description of you guys not being formal enough to go in the dining room there, maybe.
Well, it didn't stop us.
At the old hotel, it didn't stop you.
No, and I don't know if many of who all's been to Mackinac Island, but bicycles are king. Okay, and so we had dinner and we needed to ride back to the hotel where we were staying, Grand Hotel, and there was no way to get there, so we took a bike. Apparently, that's what everybody does. You take it, you leave it, and then eventually the bicycle vendors sort out whose bike is where.
And just pick them up and take them.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool. So at what point so when you guys ended up in Milwaukee, you guys, on this trip, you ended up in Milwaukee at Evinrude headquarters?
Yes.
Eventually?
Right, yes.
Is this when Bill got the job offer?
Yes.
Okay.
At the time, he had quit his previous job.
So he quit. He just
quit.
And I don't think we talked about that. Didn't you say that they weren't going to give him time off or something? So he just said.
Right. He said, okay, I'm going to leave. So then they offered him a job in Milwaukee. It wasn't specific about what job, but they just said there would be a job for him.
Okay. Wow, that's cool. That must have been, I mean, were you guys expecting that?
No, not at all.
Wow, that's neat. What a life change. And then so you got this job offer, then you had this rest of this voyage to make, right? And at what point, so tell us about how the decision was made to go to Key West, and then talk about some highlights of that journey.
When we got to Milwaukee, there was some scuttlebutt regarding the length of the trip. I think Evinrude was billing it as the longest outboard trip, ever, or whatever. And somebody had contacted them and said, well, no, my trip was longer. And I don't know the details of that. But anyway, so they said, well, okay, we'll go to Key West. And Bill might have suggested, let's keep going then.
Yeah.
So we did continue from New York down the intercoastal to Key West.
So you guys got to keep going.
Yeah, we did.
And
we did.
Highlights of that portion?
It was very busy. And there was, the days were much shorter, and not the physical day, but in Alaska, of course, we would run for 12, 14 hours, and then stop. But not along the intercoastal there. 20 miles and you were stopping.
And they also probably wanted you to stop and talk to media and stuff like that.
Now, when we were on the St. Lawrence Seaway, we were instructed to go through one of their locks. They had one lock, you could go through the actual gates. Well, we got caught crossways in the current, so we had suffered some damage to the boat. So around, at a point in the intercoastal, fairly close to Baltimore, I don't think we went through Baltimore, but fairly close, we stopped for a couple of days, and an Evinrude dealer repaired the boat because it had splintered the fiberglass on the side.
Gotcha.
So that was one of the stops we made, but there were a lot of stops on the intercoastal.
I can imagine. And then you also, you guys would have done the Dismal Swamp then through Virginia, North Carolina, which is that's an interesting waterway itself. And then
it's not dismal.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And then when you found yourselves down, towards the Keys, any specific recollections? That was when the Keys were a much more, they weren't empty, but it was sure as heck Florida was a lot less developed at that point.
Yeah.
And blue water and all that, right?
Right. Well, we went down, we went outside. Once you leave the intercoastal, you go out. We went outside, and then we cut through at one of the major passes.
Okay.
To continue the trip. But we did come in at the wharf there at Key West. I think that picture might be in the book.
Yeah, I think it is actually.
All
and
the
then
brass standing up there.
all the brass were standing
Yeah,
up there, I'm sure.
All the dress whites. I mean, they weren't in formation or anything. We weren't important like that, but.
Oh, you were important.
No.
Do you remember? Do you have any recollections of Mr. Evinrude? Like, did you have any interactions
yeah.
with him? And what was he like?
He was a very nice man, and married to Frances Langford. Now she is the Bickering Bickersons. She's Mrs. Bickerson.
Okay.
Okay. So
Gotcha.
that's where we mostly know her. Of course, I'm of an age you probably never heard of her, but anyway. So the two of them were delightful. And they have a house in Milwaukee too.
Oh, okay.
So we went out to dinner with them and, had some social interactions with them.
So Bill ended up. How would you describe the job that he had with Evinrude? Because he ended up doing some pretty interesting promotional work.
He was manager of sales promotion. I think to start, and then had a couple of other jobs too. I can't remember. During his tenure, I can't remember what his jobs were.
One of the things that he was involved in is the infamous and famous Live and Let Die boat chase scene, which is considered by most people the greatest boat chase scene ever filmed.
Right.
Do you remember talking to him about that?
I did. They, the producers, in their infinite wisdom, had decided, they had scripted that this guy would be killed by being run over by a propeller on this giant Evinrude engine.
Right.
And the folks at Evinrude said, no, let's rewrite that.
Did Bill have a hand in saying, I don't know about that, or
Well, he brought it to the brass. I mean, what company wants their propellers to be cutting up somebody?
Yes, absolutely.
And what they did, they were magnifying everything. So it wasn't really that big, but they made the engine look like it was huge and the propeller huge, and it just was out of proportion to real life.
Did they actually shoot that scene, do you know?
I don't know whether they shot it and then cut it, but I don't think it's in the movie now.
Do you remember seeing the movie when it came out in theaters? I'm just wondering.
I remember seeing the movie, yeah.
I remember, I was a little kid, and I remember just being so blown away. I mean, it's just such a funny, you have the prototypical Southern sheriff who ended up being, the model for Beaufort Justice and Smokey and the Bandit, and then you've got the crazy jumps over the causeways and stuff like that.
Right.
It's just mind-boggling.
And that really happened. I mean, they did take a boat over the causeway. That was, but that wasn't the controversial part of it.
Right. Gotcha. Did he have a hand in any other like things? Well, that you know of, promotions or that sort of thing that we would have heard of with Evinrude in the other year.
Pretty much all the promotions
really
we were involved in. There was one match race held in St. Louis on the Merrimack River, which is a tiny, tiny little feeder into the Mississippi south of St. Louis. And what they did, they set up a circuit, and they had identical boats, identical engines, and all 20 boat racing drivers. Okay, and they just had a match race, right? The equipment matches. Who's the best driver?
It's like the International Race of Champions for cars. They would do those IROC Camaros. So it was really, so it was all about the driver. That's really cool. That's really interesting.
So that was an interesting promotion.
Yeah, for sure. Now you had said that, this trip was a real turning point sort of in your life. Yeah.
It's a life changer.
Yeah.
We ended up moving to Milwaukee, and I subsequently spent 35 years in Milwaukee, meeting people I never would have met, along the way, including Mr. Robbins. And so it's a life changer.
And and just so people know, you and Bill did eventually split in 1981, yeah?
Yeah.
And then you met Mr. Robbins, who you continued to be married to for...
Right. Well, and then he died finally in 92. So.
Now, was he a boater as well?
No. His idea of boating was a small boat, very small, So when he died, then we also started camping.
Okay,
tent camping. And so I camped, after he died, I camped 3 years by myself
Really?
mastered setting up the tent and everything
Uh-huh.
and breaking it down. And finally I thought, this is a lot of work. And so I had bought myself a canoe, and I was up in Door County, which is the finger of Wisconsin,
Okay.
going into Lake Michigan.
A paddle canoe, not a motorized canoe.
Yeah, just a paddle canoe, right, 16 feet, and fiberglass.
Mm-hmm.
So I was paddling throughout all the big anchorage, big boats anchored there, and I said, oh, boy, I'd really like one of those. And I thought, well, why don't I get one? So I went right home and bought my my boat.
What'd you get?
I got a 26-foot Bayliner command bridge.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And so Mr. Robbins had passed away at this point.
He had passed away. Yeah.
And so this was your boat.
Yes. He had bought a little car-top sailboat, but it didn't.
We had one of those. My
It
dad
didn't sail
well.
sank
it.
Yeah, it didn't sail well. It didn't paddle well. We had an engine on the back. It didn't even do the engine well on the back. We took it out on the Mississippi one time, one camping trip, and almost didn't make it back to shore. I mean,
Wow.
it was so it just, you couldn't control it. It was like a bathtub.
So you got this Bayliner. What
Yeah.
year roughly did you get the Bayliner?
I bought that in '94.
Okay.
94.
And how did you put it to use?
I docked it in the Municipal Marina in Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
And then after a while, I joined Milwaukee Yacht Club.
Okay.
And I docked it there. And I used it until, when did I sell it? 91 or something? Can't remember.
So what year you think did you buy
Oh,
it?
it can be 91. It was
Yeah.
after 91.
Okay.
I bought it in 84 for sure.
Oh, wow.
I
So
had
you-
it for
you-
like 17 years, so 81.
17 years.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
Wow. And you sold it. Why'd you sell it? Why'd you end up? And then what happened with your boating career, if anything?
by that time I had moved to Florida.
Okay.
And Florida, the cabin cruiser I had, the Bayliner, didn't have air conditioning, okay? And it was not suitable for Florida. It was a little bit too deep draft, okay? And so what you want down here is a go-fast boat, something shallow draft,
Right.
or a pontoon boat. So I had both.
Oh, cool.
I had, not at the same time. I had the go-fast boat first, and then that threw a rod. So I had to either repower the whole thing, which involved rewiring, but it was just a massive project.
Yeah.
Or sell the hull.
And what kind of hull was it? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't remember.
But it went fast.
Yeah, it was go fast.
Right.
And so I sold that rig, just the hull and the trailer, and then I bought. What did I buy then? Oh, a pontoon boat.
Okay.
Custom-made pontoon boat.
Cool.
Made out here in LaBelle.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
I had that, and then finally it was a lot of work. It became a lot of work. Of course, my age had nothing to do with it, of course. It was a lot of
You're
work.
pretty dang robust.
It was
to me.
a lot of work. So anyway, that was, so I donated that to St. Vincent de Paul,
Oh wow.
and
that's
they ended
awesome.
up selling it.
Well, you've had a heck of a boating life. It sounds like. I'm wondering if when you look back, particularly on your trip with Bill, you were obviously really adventurous, and you obviously continued to be so. I'm wondering if you thought about what life would have been if you hadn't made the trip.
I've thought about that many times. Had I not moved to Milwaukee, I wouldn't have met Mr. Robbins. That just, I wouldn't have my stepchildren that are dear to me now, and 2 grandsons.
Oh wow.
No great grands yet.
Come
Come on, kids, get busy.
Gotcha. And yeah, I mean it's amazing. Like what an incredible opportunity to do something nobody'd ever done. Right? I mean, how many people can actually say that?
Right.
That's a really cool thing.
And memories, lots and lots of memories.
Is there any I'm wondering, is there any one instance from this trip that really, I don't know, define the whole thing for you, or that you really go back to and think, man,
Well, not one thing. That it just was such an experience. You can't really equate it to what life might have been. We would have continued boating for sure. He was headed for a new boat, as I mentioned, when he got rid of our our other boat.
Right. Well, Kathy, I cannot thank you enough. This has been a real honor.
Well, you're welcome, Chris.
And,
It's been fun for me too.
Well, great. And we're going to share, I'm going to go through some photos with Kathy, and we're going to share them when we publish this story. And I just think it's too cool. So this is what I love about my job, is meeting folks like you. So thank you so very much. And
well, you are welcome.
This is Chris Dixon signing out for Power and Motor Yacht, and we will see you guys hopefully on the water. Providing equal stabilizing force to gyros at rest and significantly more underway, while also outperforming all other forms of fin stabilizers, Sleipner's Vector fin stabilizers are simply the best on the market. Available with either hydraulic or electric actuators, Sleipner's stabilizers are quiet, efficient, and proven to last with minimal maintenance, using the same technology as aircraft landing gear and the Mars rovers. Learn more at emtra.com.